call will be limited to 35 minutes.
Hello?
What have you been up to, bro?
Holy fuck. Been thinking about coming to see you.
Yeah, you should, dude.
Things been good around here. Same thing, different day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cop some serious charges.
Yeah. Fucking, I know. Sorry to hear that.
No, it isn't what it seems.
Yeah, I kind of figured that. Been all over the news.
Yeah.
All over fucking Facebook.
Yeah, I know.
All kinds of shit.
Fucking.
You're the Iron Range.
Huh?
You're the new Iron Range murderer.
Oh, really? Is that what that is?
the beheader.
The decapitator.
Yeah.
Fucking, that's what my cellie calls me. Calls me decap.
Yo, decap.
Yeah.
Not decaf, but decap.
Like decaf, yeah.
Dude, it's good to hear from you, man. You're one of my good friends. I hate this.
Yeah, you're not the only one.
Oh, imagine how you feel.
But anyways, once the truth comes out and shit like that, you know, I'm not stressing it.
By the time of this call from 35-year-old Joe Thoresen, Itasca County detectives were about a month into their investigation in the death of 20-year-old David Haiman. The young man had been found bludgeoned and decapitated, his body and head separated by several feet in a wooded area out along Whispering Pines Road in the Ball Club area of Minnesota. The remains had been out for several days when investigators visited Joe on June 26, 2016 at his apartment at 513 2nd Avenue Northeast in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. The sheriff's office, just steps away from Joe's home, had been told about strange interactions involving Joe in the lead up to the disappearance of the 20-year-old, whose location by that point was unknown to law enforcement. But they weren't without their cooperators. His girlfriend, 22-year-old Kayleene Greniger, is willing to tell them an absolutely wild story involving a drug-fueled, sleepless night of paranoia, car crashes and troubles, and what was perceived as revenge.
I was like, am I under arrest? Is there any charges? They're like, no, not yet. And I was like, then you can get the fuck out of my house then. Come talk to you in the morning.
Joe had been sleeping with his girlfriend Kayleene when he woke up to banging on the front door at around 10:55 p.m. on Sunday, June 26, 2016. It was a month before that jail call when he was greeted by two investigators, one with an audio recorder, and a deputy who went over to Kayleene's bedside and asked her to answer some questions about the disappearance of David Haiman. David's mother and father had been worried sick. The 20-year-old called and spoke to his mother every day, so something was definitely up when she didn't hear from him in 5 days. The family called the police on Saturday, June 25, to report a missing person. They said he also hadn't been to work at the range center in Chisholm, where he was a new residential program instructor involved in the care and daily needs of the disabled. Born on September 1, 1995 in Hibbing, he was involved with the Boy Scouts during his youth and loved the outdoors, wherein he was engaged in hunting, fishing, camping, and four-wheeling, according to his obituary. David was physically small, standing at about 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing around 130 pounds, which Joe called wiry. This will partly factor in what occurs and what doesn't in this story.
So, well, see if you can help us. We're looking for somebody.
Who's that?
David Haiman. You know him at all?
No, I knew when I was over in Hibbing and shit.
Okay.
That was a while ago, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe said he'd been friends with David for about 8 years when he was living in Hibbing. The two met through David's sister, who babysat Joe's children, which he shared with his ex, who was living in Washington State. Joe and David had occasionally gone out hunting over in Hibbing, he said, adding the two also did drugs together. But he said he left his hometown for Grand Rapids 2 years prior to get away from the drugs, specifically meth, which he noted was a big problem back there. The last time he said he saw David was in that city roughly 3 weeks ago, when he went over to the Park Place apartments and
bullshitting and stuff. Fucking went over and smoked some weed with him.
Okay.
the two were supposed to go fishing between then and now, he said, claiming that David was having a rough time at home.
Has something like this ever happened before where there's nobody can get a hold of him? Like he just kind of gets pissy and just gets out?
He can take off for a couple of weeks and then come back.
You would, huh?
Any idea where he'd go?
I have not a clue, you know.
Did you ever talk to him during those times when he was doing that? Why he would do that?
Well, usually it had to do with his dad and stuff. He'd get fight real bad with his dad.
Dad kind of a dick or what?
Yeah, his dad,
Okay.
Investigators are now sitting at the kitchen table across from Joe, who tells them throughout this interview that he'd prefer to talk to them in the morning because he's tired. He said his grogginess in part came from the medication he had just taken for what he vaguely referred to as cluster B personality disorder, which he says is a disability that prevents him from working. Investigators tell him that they are only here to tie loose ends and eliminate suspects at this point. He tells them in turn that he'd been keeping to himself to stay out of trouble. Joe tells them that he heard that David had been looking for a job recently and that he was going for an interview somewhere. Joe then tells them that he thinks David needed some time to himself, considering everything he'd been going through.
Was he looking for meth then? Because maybe that'll help us. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, he probably was.
Okay.
Did you know him to be, was it a recreational thing? Was it something that was hard? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like he was...
I know that, like he's really started getting hard into it recently and stuff like that. And he called me and asked, you know, sometimes I say, yeah, sure, you know, come on, just to talk with him.
Yep.
You know, but other than that, you know, I mean, he kept that over there.
Okay.
Joe tells them that he thinks David needed some time to himself, considering everything he'd been going through.
You never did anything with him?
No.
Smoke a little meth or nothing now and then, or hook him up or something?
No.
Nope. Okay.
Over in Hibbing, yeah.
Yeah.
But then when I got over here, I had to do something different.
Okay.
I had to get away from
Over in Hibbing, I understand. Sometimes people move to get away, fresh start.
That's exactly what I did here.
All right. Over in Hibbing, you had a rough time though?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, it's an addiction. You know what I mean? I've seen people that
And fucking people, man. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where shit just starts disappearing. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
that's exactly it, too.
Okay. All right. Were you a pretty big user back then?
Yeah, I was.
Okay. Well, how much do you go through a day?
I don't know. Probably like a half gram.
Okay. Good. Would you consider Dave an addict? Occasional user? Or?
I would say occasional. Our relationship recently has been kind of sparse, like I said.
Okay.
You know, it's kind of like, hey, I'm in town, what are you doing? Can I come say hi? And,
Okay.
Is that because of the use stuff?
Yeah,
or?
use stuff.
You know, like you're not using, he's using, so it kind of just natural progression that...
I think so. I think we
Okay.
just naturally spread, you know.
Did you ever tell him, say, hey man, if you're you don't show up here? Or?
No, you know, I like to create, you know, like a safe atmosphere. You know, if you need to get away, please come over and get away.
Well,
it doesn't matter what you're on or whatever. Just
Right. So what's the secret? How'd you quit?
got the hell out of there.
Did you?
Yeah, I got away from it and just
Good for you, man.
came
I
over
wish I could say
here.
that to a lot of other people. It's tough, you know what I mean?
It is tough.
I've seen some real good people go down because of it, you know what I mean? It's just like it drags you down.
Drags everything down.
Yeah.
Why'd you chop his head off?
I didn't.
So that's all big story too?
Corwin.
Oh, he did that?
Mm-hmm.
He's still out and loose and shit.
Yeah, I know, because he ratted and fucking said that I went and fucking did everything.
Have you had any run-ins with the law recently?
Has he?
Have you?
Me?
Yeah.
Just recently when Tristan.
Tristan.
I got a paraphernalia ticket.
Oh, all right.
So that's the last time.
When was that?
Fucking a couple days ago.
A couple days ago?
Actually, it was the day before, near midnight on June 25, when Tristan Corwin, aged 19, is driving a red two-door Dodge Stratus down Highway 2 with Joe Thoresen in the passenger seat. Joe isn't wearing a seatbelt and the car's license plate is obstructed. Tristan has meth on him and in his system. Joe is high. Joe is definitely high. Their mission is to get from A to B without alerting law enforcement.
Whose vehicle were you taking?
don't know whose car it was.
You don't know?
Can we call us tonight?
Well, whose car was that? Do you think you might know who it is?
I have not.
Did Tristan pick you up or what?
Yeah, Tristan picked me up.
Tristan and Joe are not in luck. Deer River Patrolman Michael Cowan is sitting in his squad car on US Highway 2 on Main Street in front of a Holiday gas station when a red Stratus blows by him. It goes past 2nd Avenue when he flips on his lights. But the car doesn't stop. In fact, it picks up speed. I heard Joe say drive, and I mean, I didn't feel like getting stabbed or anything if I stopped, Tristan said in court. The patrolman radios dispatch to tell them of the fleeing vehicle. He gives chase, but the car is blowing past the limits, 65 in a 50 zone and then accelerating to 90 miles an hour. We rounded the bend, still heading east toward Grand Rapids, Cohasset, speeds continue to increase, reaching about 100 miles an hour, and then the vehicle brake lights come on, the patrolman said in court. Vehicle kind of lost control a little bit, thought he was maybe going to stop or try to run into the ditch. He was able to gain control. This is a divided highway, so they went into the median or the ditch, came back out of the ditch, and proceeded down County Road 161, which would be north. The car is approaching Tristan's home, so Joe tells him to slow down so he can hop out. The car is fishtailing for a bit until Tristan slows down, and Joe opens the passenger side door, sticks his leg out in an attempt to flee, but his shoe comes loose and then off. The passenger door closes, and the car is on its way again. It continues for about half a mile down County Road 128 until Tristan pulls on the e-brake, throws the car in first gear, and jumps out while it's still moving toward a ditch. Tristan flees into the woods while Joe is forced to the ground at gunpoint and is arrested by the patrolman. Joe is given a citation for weed in his pocket and is released, but not before he is forced to give up his phone number and address because Patrolman Cowan still needed to figure out whose car this was. K9 units are called to the scene to search for the driver, who eventually surrenders on his own and is brought back to the squad car and is asked for a statement. Tristan explained in court he was worried about what would happen to his girlfriend Eva if he dropped off Joe near their home, and that because he was going to be charged and put away for a while, he wanted to get home to say goodbye to her. Just in case this wasn't clear, Tristan was definitely high, and he was hit with 5 charges: unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, fleeing a peace officer in a motor vehicle, 2 misdemeanor counts of driving while impaired and fleeing a peace officer on foot, and more importantly for this story, 3 felony counts of theft of a motor vehicle. Patrolman Cowan asks another officer to see if he could locate the owner of the 2-door because the only paperwork they had was a bill of sale out of Hibbing with an illegible name on it. It's not long before the patrolman gets information from his colleague, Officer Wilhelm. He told me who it was, but he was unable to get a hold of him, so he was going to try again the next day, which would have been a Sunday, the patrolman said in court. That day, the one on which Joe was interviewed, comes around, and the Hibbing Police Department has more information. The owner, Officer Wilhelm continued, was just reported missing.
So we did some checking. This red car registered to Dave.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's ironic. Don't you think?
Yeah, it is ironic.
Yeah.
It is ironic.
Did Dave give you permission to take it, or Tristan, you think?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay. Tristan showed up in this car?
Yeah.
Okay. When you picked him up, was Dave with him?
No.
Okay.
Have you ever seen those two together before?
No.
Okay.
Up to this point in his interview, Joe told investigator Mark Weller that David had texted him about buying meth late on the 20th, but that there was no follow-through. He maintained he hadn't seen David in 3 weeks, but then was forced to iron out some of the details of his story after investigators said they were able to prove that he had seen him in the flesh at around 2 a.m. on the 21st. Before David drove up to Joe's apartment in his newly purchased 2005 red Dodge Stratus, Joe said he made contact over Facebook with a known drug dealer in the ball club area named Kenny Lyons, declining to say where exactly it was that he dropped off David at 6 a.m. to score a hit because he said he feared for his safety. But he did provide the investigator a crumb and said it was somewhere near Winnie Dam. David, Joe's story goes, told him to come back with his car in a couple of hours. But when he returned, Joe said he wasn't there. He then asked the establishment if they had seen him, and he said they told him he left with some girl back to Hibbing.
Well, I wanted to get hold of him for it. They still drop off his car.
Okay.
Shit.
Did you get a hold of him?
No, I couldn't.
Have you tried to contact him?
Yeah, I tried to Facebook him.
Facebook him?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know when that was? That helps. I mean, it narrows it down, man. I appreciate it.
It was probably the 21st.
21st?
Yeah,
That's how Joe ended up with David's car, he said. Joe said it wasn't unusual for David to leave his car with others, as he's done this type of thing before. No longer was his story that he bussed days later to the White Oak Casino with $40 in his pocket to play the penny machines when he saw Tristan grabbing some cigarettes. But Joe's second version had one glaring crater in it that, if not for a wild coincidence, may have flown over the investigators. The very morning that Joe said he drove David to Kenny Lyons, police were at the drug dealer's place on a domestic call.
Here's the deal.
Oh, gosh. I
was with Kenny that night.
Were you? Yeah. Why is he an informant now?
He's not an informant, but he should have went to jail that night because him and his old lady were domesticating there, and he left.
Yeah. So what time did you let him?
That morning.
That morning? Okay. So.
I mean, that's, you know what I mean?
Oh, what?
Well, you said he wasn't, you said you didn't know whose car it was.
No.
You know, it's Dave's car. I'm not worried about getting Dave jammed up, you know what I mean?
You know, you guys are really kind of like, just go ahead and say it. Whatever you're going to say it. I mean, you guys are beating around the bush about something.
Where can we find Dave?
Huh? I don't know. I don't fucking know.
Well, why do we keep finding holes in the story?
Huh?
Yeah.
Why do we keep finding holes in the story?
Yeah. That's the question I have. It is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. I'd like to continue this on in the morning. Am I being charged with anything?
You being charged with anything?
Yeah.
Why would I charge you with
Well,
anything?
that's what the question is.
You haven't committed a crime?
No, I haven't committed any crimes.
Okay.
So you guys can go ahead and I'll continue this on in the morning. Okay?
Here's the deal, though. I mean,
You guys, no,
Put yourself in my shoes.
you guys can leave now. You guys can leave.
Okay.
Okay?
all right.
Alright.
So as far as you know,
I will be down in the morning, right away in the morning, and I'll go ahead and go through any questions and anything you have. Okay? I am really groggy right now. I am fucking doped on medication. I really like to get my fucking sleep like I need.
Okay.
So you guys may leave now.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
All right?
And your girlfriend doesn't know Dave?
She doesn't know Dave.
Do you mind if we talk to her?
Yeah, I do. She's sleeping.
Well, can she tell us that?
No.
She's an adult. I mean, can she
Yeah,
tell us if
she's sleeping. You guys can leave now.
But investigators were going nowhere without Joe tonight and arrested him on suspicion that he had something to do with David's disappearance. Meanwhile, Kayleene was awake. Let me be clear. Kayleene was wide awake. The self-described tweaker had been amped up on meth every day for 6 months, she claimed, but she was still willing to go to the police station and provide a statement. Her younger brother Jeff Greniger, who was staying at their place as a vagabond, was filled in on what was happening.
you know something, tell me now.
Shit.
We got a guy that's missing. He was found in his car. No one's seen him in a week. And he talks to his mom every day. Every day. This guy does. And he hasn't talked to his mom in a week. The last person that saw him was this guy.
Investigators learned from Kayleene's first statement that David was in fact dead, that his body was dumped along Whispering Pines Road north of the village of Ball Club, and that it was all Joe's doing. At 2:30 a.m. that night, now the 27th of June, she was transported to the general area where they might find him. It was dark, heavy foliage, it was high grass, and we could not locate him at that time, Investigator Weller said in court. David's remains were only about 30 yards from where we were initially, but at the time we couldn't see him. Despite 3 hours of searching, with cadaver dogs on the prowl, David was still considered a missing person by the time they packed up and left the scene at 5:30 a.m., replaced that morning by another team to continue the search. 4 hours later, at 9:30 a.m., Investigator Weller took a phone call from Deputy Jake Olson, who stayed behind. Roughly 4 miles north of Ball Club, on the west side of East Bank Road, he said he found the torso, but there was no head, Investigator Weller said in court. On the opposite side of that road, tipped off by the odor, Deputy Olson discovered the victim's head, about 8 feet off the road. He said it was unrecognizable. At 7:15 p.m. that night, a forensics team from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, acting on a search warrant, was brought to Joe's apartment to collect evidence and take photos. They found what appeared to be blood in several parts of the apartment. Kayleene was brought in front of Investigator Weller for a second time at 2 p.m. on June 28. The hope for investigators was a definitive story of what happened to David Haiman.
If something bad happened, and your sister told you what happened, you need to tell me.
Truth be told, I'm not telling me anything anyways.
Truth be told, I've been doing this job long enough, she would. Family, you damn right.
We're close, but only in like ride or die situation, I guess you'd say. Like,
Well,
if her life was at stake, she'd fill me in on something.
Well, is she afraid of Joe? Did he do something and she saw it? It's a possibility. Did she tell you that?
She never talks about stuff between her and Joe.
And he hasn't been violent with her at all?
Not that I know of. If anything, she's the violent one. She's a grandmother.
Kayleene is trying to gouge her eyes out. Literally. It's 5 days earlier, after 8 p.m. on Tuesday, June 21, and she's out in the front yard of the home of their friends, Tristan and Eva, when she grabs a rock and brings it up to her face in an attempt to, somehow, physically remove what she had already seen. "I can't quit seeing it," she said in court a year later, alluding to what had happened to David Haiman. Joe, who sees her storming off along the side of the road, runs out and allegedly physically assaults and restrains her, throws her over his shoulder mid-tantrum, and puts her in the Dodge Stratus they'd been driving, where she passes out. Up to this point, the group of friends was on a toxic cocktail of meth, alcohol, and weed when Joe and Kayleene started arguing moments before her drug-induced episode. So it was perhaps hardly surprising then that Kayleene said in her second statement to investigators that she couldn't differentiate the days of her week in hell.
Like I said, we had been high for a while, all the days and everything kind of just blended together.
What was clear through the drug fog was the fact that the red Dodge Stratus that Joe had been driving with Kayleene in the passenger seat had crashed into a ditch. Yes, this is a separate crash, right before they found themselves at the home of Tristan and Eva. Joe was going really fast and there was a sharp turn on that road right outside of Tristan and Eva's, and we ended up going into the ditch, Kayleene testified. Rebecca Murphy and Eric Prem had just left her parents' place at around 8 p.m. to see her cousin at the White Oak Casino in Deer River, an occasional retreat for some in the friend group, when they saw Tristan on the side of the road walking back to his home. She testified that Tristan asked for a ride down to the ditch after being contacted by Joe about the accident. When we got there, they quickly got dressed and got out, and they both started pulling stuff out of their vehicle, which were all kinds of bags, Rebecca said in court, referring to Kayleene and Joe. She said Kayleene was half naked and the couple was being intimate despite their circumstances. She had asked to help them get the Stratus, whose headlights were still on, out of the ditch. Eric, who knew this road to be particularly dangerous because of the 90-degree bend, testified in court that Kayleene told him Joe lost control because she distracted him. Nevertheless, he thought it was a bad idea to help them because he was worried about the legal ramifications of something happening to the car as they towed it out. For Rebecca, it was Joe's crazy eyes that moved her to decline helping. She said she thought he was on meth or some other hard drug. The casino-bound couple said their good lucks and goodbyes and continued toward their original destination. Meanwhile, Joe and Kayleene removed stuff from the car and were driven to Tristan's place as the car was towed to the trailer property on Pincherry Road in Cohasset. Quite the housewarming for Tristan and Eva, who had only started renting the property days before, when they started dating again.
I know there was some clothes.
Okay. So what? I'm sorry.
You know, that was...
What was in there? I know this upset you. I'm just trying to find out what upset you. What was in there?
The bat and the knife.
The bat and knife was in there then?
And some clothes.
Some clothes? Okay. Were the bat and knives yours?
No.
No?
I don't own anything like that.
No, I'm not saying yours, but whether you or Joe's?
I don't think so.
Joe and Kayleene started putting their stuff in the trailer. They designated some things to be burnt that day, some stuff to be donated to Goodwill, and David's laptop to be sold. Joe broke David's cell phone. Tristan said in court he noticed that Joe had a backpack with the handle of a wooden baseball bat sticking out of it. We kind of just sat around and talked, Eva testified in court. Meth was being used by Joe, Tristan, and Kayleene. I was not using at the time because I was on probation. I know they were really high, Eva added. Kayleene was like falling over in my kitchen at one point in time, so I tried to get her to eat. That didn't happen. I don't know. You could tell that they were really high. When Kayleene woke up inside the Stratus, she stormed out and started arguing with Joe about him letting her sleep in the car. They got aggressive, Eva said. They hit each other. She lost her glasses, her shoes. They were just both a mess. Joe and Kayleene stayed for a night at the trailer, during which time Tristan said he was told by the landlord to burn some of the garbage on the property in a fire pit. As he was piling up some wood, Tristan said he picked up the bat he saw in Joe's bag, freaked out, and threw it in the fire. I was scared. I touched it. I figured that maybe they were trying to set me up for it because they had been in my house. To Tristan, this wasn't an ordinary bat. Earlier that day, with Eva out of earshot, Joe allegedly told him while in the company of Kayleene that the car was some kid's or something, and he had hit the kid in the head with a bat twice, and then he said he cut his head off with a machete, and he was kind of laughing about it, he recalled in court, adding he actually didn't believe him initially. Kayleene, he noted, was pretty quiet and didn't say much. Other items found in the fire pit by investigators executing a search warrant on the property were a knife and bags containing things that were sort of relevant to the investigation. Things like David's fishing license, driver's license, casino card, and what looked like a soot-covered envelope that contained David Haiman's title to the red Dodge Stratus. Back at Joe's apartment, forensics took swabs of blood from the wall of the hallway, from the floor just inside the apartment doorway, from a mop in the closet, from a white t-shirt, black t-shirt, green boxers, socks, towel, blanket, black tennis shoes, jeans, from a dress and the dresser in the bedroom, from a knife blade found on the bedroom dresser, from the bedroom floor, from duct tape strewn throughout the room, from a metal chair, and from a machete found between the mattress and the box spring. All swabs contained David's DNA. Also in the bedroom was a Coleman sleeping bag. Contained within were miscellaneous items like ropes and bondage-type articles and sex toys, including a rope, a restraint, a strap with a metal hook, a ball gag, and a dildo. And found on a dresser in the bedroom was a note advertising for positions including technical advisor, costume and prop coordinator, and actress for the launch of an adult website. Roughly 12 hours before Kayleene tried to pry her eyes out, Loretta Cloud was pulling out of the driveway of the ball club home she rented. Loretta had an orientation for work at 10 a.m. in Cass Lake, so she gave herself about a 30-minute cushion to that appointment when she got in the car at roughly 9 a.m. Any delay, and she may have been a spectator to a strange conversation her husband, Roger, had with some troublemakers that morning. As she was pulling out of the driveway, driving in next to her was a red Dodge Stratus she said she had never seen before. Joe and Kayleene were just acquaintances to Loretta. The home she rented was owned by Joe's brother-in-law. She said she did not know the boy, David Haiman, in the back seat. Loretta said she didn't think anything of it and left. Moments later, Roger, who was also getting ready to head out, hears a knock at the door and opens to Joe and Kayleene. Roger invited them in, noting that he and Joe had a regular conversation, nothing long or deep. They just sat around, Roger said in court. Roger recalled Joe asking him whether he had anything to put down an injured farm animal that couldn't be saved. Roger said the question wasn't unusual because Joe's parents owned horses, an explanation offset by the fact that he had never before heard a question like that from him. I didn't respond because I didn't have anything he could use to put it down, Roger said. It was only when he stepped outside that Roger realized there was another person with the couple. Roger didn't indicate in his testimony whether he had a conversation with the boy or not, just that he didn't ask for help. About 4 hours later, at 2 p.m., Jody Dewey is moping around her home when she hears someone at the front door. When she answers, she sees 3 people: Joe, Kayleene, and David. Jody had received a text message from ex-boyfriend Joe earlier that day about him possibly coming by. And despite texts indicating Joe would be over, she said she really didn't expect him to show up. The last time she had contact with him, after all, was about a year ago. What I noticed about David was that he looked troubled, Jody said in court, adding she made the mistake of doing meth with the group. He had a scrape on his eye, and then he showed me his wrists. They looked like he'd been tied up, and that's what he told me, that he was tied up to a chair. Jody's father, who was at work at the time, owned a Polaris four-wheeler that Joe and Kayleene had spotted on the property. They asked to take it for a lap around the 2 acres. In the 5 minutes that they were joyriding, Jody said she was able to speak with David privately as he rolled cigarettes in his car. David told me that they had his car and that they wouldn't let him leave, Jody said in court. He was supposed to be at work that morning, but they wouldn't let him go home, and he wanted to go home. He said that he was supposed to be at work, and he made it sound like they wouldn't let him go anywhere. And he told me that they tied him up, and he showed me his wrists and around his stomach, and it was red, like it was burned, like he'd been tied up. He had like a scrape or a cut on his elbow, and I felt bad for him, and I just wanted to help him, so I put medicine on there. I had medicine, and I put it on his elbow, and offered him something to eat, and he didn't want anything to eat, and I gave him pop. Despite what she was seeing, Jody said David did not ask her to call the police or ask to be sheltered because she said he was afraid. If only she knew. When David drove up to Joe's 1-bedroom apartment in the early morning hours of that day to hang out and do drugs, he came upon Joe, Kayleene, Kayleen's brother Jeff, and another guy surrounding a weed bowl, coke, meth, and alcohol. As they were sitting, Joe suddenly got aggressive with David, according to Jeff's testimony in court. He started yelling at David, who was smiling but clearly nervous, he said. Joe told him, "Why the fuck are you smiling?" Jeff recalled, before Joe got up and started getting physical with him. He then grabbed the kid by the throat and put him against the wall and off his feet, and he was just being overly aggressive and mean to the poor kid. I didn't know what was going on other than what they said they claimed happened. Joe was eventually separated from David, but it was only a brief reprieve for the man who was 15 years younger, at least 7 inches shorter, and 70 pounds lighter than his aggressor. Jeff said he tried unsuccessfully to sidetrack Joe, so he escaped into the bedroom after Kayleene gave him their phone to try and get away from it. His way of getting away from it was, of course, to do a drug deal. But before he could coordinate his getaway, David, Joe, and Kayleene entered the room. Joe was telling him to get down on his knees and put his hands behind his head, and "We're going to get this out of you. You're going to tell us," Jeff recalled, adding David was completely compliant and just scared shitless. Joe then told Kayleene to tie him up with tape. The last thing Jeff said he saw before he left to do the drug deal was David bound and lying on his stomach.
Did Joe assault him in the apartment too?
A little bit.
Okay.
It was more me.
Huh?
It was more me.
More of you? Okay. Did he get tied up?
Yes.
Okay. And how did he get tied up?
With a rope.
And where was his hands when he got tied up?
Behind him.
Behind his back? Okay. Did his feet get tied up?
Yes.
And did he get anything like a gag or tape around the mouth or anything like that?
I don't remember.
Okay. And then after he was tied up is when he got assaulted?
A little bit before, too.
Okay. And
he kept trying to hit me back.
who did?
Dave.
And is that while Joe was holding him? Huh?
Well, Joe was standing and he wasn't trying. And when Joe was holding him, he kept trying to get out. Please go.
He kept trying to what?
Can we please just go home?
You understand the importance of this investigation, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you say that you was assaulted, was you punching, kicking, hitting with an object? I need to know that.
I was punching him. I may have kicked him a couple times.
Okay, and when you punched him, where was it? Where'd you punch him at?
Mostly in his face.
Okay. And about how many times?
I don't know. A few times.
Okay. And when you kicked him, did you kick him in the face as well?
No.
Where'd you kick him?
His gut.
Okay.
Joe only punched him once or twice.
And where'd you punch him at?
That's my girl.
Huh?
Hurt my girl.
He said what?
That's my girl. Hurt my girl. My girl.
And that's when he had punched him? So you guys untied him and then Joe assaulted him?
Yes. Him and Joe went at it.
So him and Joe fought?
Yes, but David couldn't hit him.
He what?
David couldn't hit him because he was so slow and also wasn't.
Joe tied him up or you tied him up?
I did.
And he let you tie him up?
Yes. I asked him, can I tie you up? Yeah. Okay. So I did it.
Did you say why you were going to tie him up?
Yes.
You told him you were going to tie him up so you could hit him?
Yes.
And he was okay with that?
Yes.
How bad was he bleeding when this was all over?
Well, I broke his nose, so...
How do you know you broke his nose?
Because of the way the blood was coming out.
An hour and a half after he left, Jeff returned to what he described in court as a spooky atmosphere. I walked in the door and they had some classical music playing. Extremely out of character for both of them, he said, noting Kayleene listens to rap and Joe to metal. The vibe was off. He said he listened for a bit to see what was going on. Then Kayleene opens enough of the bedroom door to slip out and immediately closes it behind her. "What's up?" Jeff said she said to him in a monotone voice. I said, "What do you mean, what's up?" I said, "What's up here? What are you guys doing? What's up with the weird music? What's going on here?" He said Joe stepped out of the bedroom in the same manner, closing the door immediately behind him and asking Jeff, "What's up?" in a monotone voice. I was extremely on edge, Jeff recalled. I didn't know what was going on. I said, "What the fuck's up here? What are you guys doing?" To which Joe said, "A surprise. Hope you're ready. You still ride or die?" Joe then opens the door to David lying on his side on the floor, still tied up. His eyes all swelled up, he's bleeding out of his mouth, his lips all cut up, and he's just staring off in the distance, under the bed or at something. He glances up at me and makes eye contact, and the kid's eyes told me he was scared and he knew something was coming, and he looked like he had been through hell and back, and I freaked, Jeff said. It was just this sense of doom, just spookier than shit. He said Joe tried to calm him by grabbing him by the back of his neck and bringing his head to his, which Jeff said induced PTSD in him. I told him, I said I gotta go. I got to get the hell out of here, Jeff said, claiming Joe asked him if he was going to help them, to which he declined. He bolted out of the door and ran to his friend's house at the Canal Street Apartments. Meanwhile, Joe and Kayleene left David at the apartment for a little bit. They hit up a Holiday gas station and then the White Oak Casino, where an employee testified he saw a man who clearly looked like he was on some hard drugs. The couple then returns to the apartment to grab David. David willfully walks toward his own car and climbs into the back seat. Why? Because, as Kayleene testified and the state argued in court, you don't say no to Joe. The state argued that Joe then grabs his favorite toy, a machete whose handle was wrapped in black electrical tape, and slips it between the driver's seat and the door. They then make a trip to Loretta's and then to Jody's place, where Joe and Kayleene have just completed their four-wheeling trip. As Kayleene heads back inside Jody's house, Joe grabs a wooden baseball bat from the ATV and puts it in David's car. He then follows Kayleene inside, where the group, minus David, does a second line of meth. Joe confiscates 2 knives from his host's home, puts them in Kayleen's purse, and the 3 leave. I was scared because I was high on drugs and my dad was about to come home, Jody said, adding she was relieved that, despite saying they might return, they didn't. They didn't because, in their drug-addled minds, they had far more important things to do, like putting down an injured man.
We were just having fun and out riding on the trail.
Where were you sitting in the car when you guys were riding around?
When we were riding around, I was in the front seat.
Passenger side, driver's side?
Passenger.
And who was driving?
Joe.
And where was Dave?
Back seat.
Back seat right, back seat left, back seat middle.
He was all over the place in the back.
Why is that?
Because he just kept moving from spot to spot.
Why did he do that, do you know?
Probably for a better view.
Okay. Was he tied up at all in the back seat?
No.
Okay. Was he ever in the trunk?
No.
Was he still bleeding when he was in the car from being assaulted?
No.
Okay. So he was in the car, he was fine.
Yes.
Alright. We're gonna go over again what happened out on the trail.
Jeff Greniger is on the phone with a friend trying to figure out what to do. He just took shelter in his friend Benjamin's apartment after witnessing what had happened to David at Joe's apartment. Bunch of tweaker drama was the first thing Jeff said Benjamin thought when he told him about what he saw. No, he said he told Benjamin. This was real. The person speaking to Jeff on the phone told him to just stay quiet and not worry about it right now, Jeff testified. Benjamin must have thought he couldn't catch a break. He was recovering from injuries he suffered from being hit by a car earlier that day and was planning to just settle down and watch a movie that night, and that's what they did. Him, Jeff, and a girl at nearly midnight. By then, Jeff had calmed down a bit, but not for long. This group had one more bad experience left before this terrible day was over. There was a knock at the door, and you'll never guess who.
What made the engine light come on, or whatever you're saying? Just making a funny sound, or, you know?
After we went through the big puddle,
Yep. Yeah, what was it doing?
the light popped on and
Yep.
it might have been smoking.
It could have been, yeah.
Did Dave get mad about that? Because he drove through them big puddles and
He seemed a little irritated, but he was still laughing.
As Joe was driving along Whispering Pines Road earlier that evening, he hit a hole in the road that caused the car to start steaming from the hood. Joe pulled over and instructed David to pop the hood and check on his car, according to Kayleene's testimony. I got out and let David out, and as Joe was getting out, he told me to roll a cigarette, Kayleene said in court. As I put my head down to roll a cigarette, I heard a loud crack. When Joe got out of the driver's side of the car, he had a baseball bat with him. Joe had gone to the front of the car with the bat. When I looked up, I saw Joe standing over David, who was now on the ground, Kayleene continued. David was groaning. He was starting to get up, and Joe hit him again with the bat over his head. He hit him a total of 2 times with the bat. David's skull was crushed by the blows, which would have caused brain damage, the medical examiner testified. But David was still conscious, unfortunately. Kayleene, who was wearing a dress, said that Joe grabbed her purse, pulled one of the 2 knives out, and kneeled over David and started stabbing him in the chest. David pleaded with Kayleene for help, but David wasn't Kayleene's friend.
Did you ever tell Joe, say, I don't like Dave no more?
No, I never did like him.
She grabbed the other knife and joined Joe in the stabbing frenzy. David started saying my name, asking for help, Kayleene testified. I responded by stabbing him more. We were both stabbing him at the same time. We were stabbing him in the chest. The drug-addled pair had stabbed the 20-year-old an unspecified number of times, but the medical examiner found at least 9 stab wounds to his face and 5 wounds to the base of his neck. But they weren't done. Joe was just standing there egging me on, said Kayleene, who was wielding Joe's machete in her right hand as she loomed over David's damaged body. I was swinging the machete at his neck multiple times until his head came off, she testified, adding she started puking after the first swing. The accepted number of times she swung the machete was actually twice, according to her. After the first swing, she alleged he told her to swing harder. Joe then disposed of David's head by stabbing it in the temple, sticking it in a bag, and tossing it in the woods. He disposed of David's body by grabbing his ankles and pulling him off the trail, according to Kayleene's testimony. She then took the knives, the baseball bat, and machete and put them in the car. The knives and the baseball bat were burned, while the machete was placed by Kayleene between the bedroom mattress and the box spring. The two then spent some time cleaning up before driving into a ditch, having sex in the car, and then being rescued by Tristan and Eva. She said something about when you do something with somebody and you're supposed to keep it a secret, you don't go and tell other people or something along those lines, Eva recalled in court about Joe and Kayleene's argument at her house that night. The pair then headed over to a friend's house. Benjamin opened the door to Joe and Kayleene at around 11:30 p.m. You could hear him, Jeff said in court, referring to Joe. And we tried playing it off like we didn't want them coming over, but they were drunk and high on whatever, and they didn't catch on. And they ended up coming upstairs, and we just sat there hanging out, and they came in. Joe had a big spot of blood on his right leg, on one of his legs, mid-thigh to mid-shin, Jeff recalled. It soaked his entire jeans. A whole spot was stained red, and I just got a bad feeling about what happened, and I asked him, "What happened to your leg?" or "What's up with the blood on your leg?" And he said he kicked a cat or something. I said, "Oh, that's nice. Unfortunate for the cat," Benjamin responded, according to his testimony. It took all of 20 minutes for a very intoxicated Joe and Kayleene to be kicked out after Joe tried to force another girl's head toward his crotch against her will. At that point, Jeff said Benjamin started to believe what he was saying. I decided to get up and go see if the kid was alright and go over to their apartment, Jeff said, adding he asked if anyone wanted to come with him. They declined because they didn't want to get involved, he said. When he arrived at Joe's apartment, he said he heard some faint music that wasn't classical and found the deadbolt was locked. He said he tried to pry the door open with a knife but sliced his finger open, so he bled on the ground. I pondered the idea of kicking the door in, but I didn't want to do damage to anything and get the cops called, Jeff said. I didn't know what to think or do. I just ended up leaving, just hoping and praying that it was going to work out and that my sister's promise meant something, so I left. If only he knew. Joe had been dating a friend of Kayleene's about a half-dozen years ago, which was how they met for the first time. After her own breakup 2 years later, Kayleene basically said Joe told her he could be her shoulder to cry on. The two started becoming close friends, hanging out often, and then finally in January 2016, they started dating. That spring, the 4-foot, 11-inch, 104-pound 22-year-old moved out of her great-grandmother's place and into the apartment of the 35-year-old. In the beginning, our relationship was good, Kayleene testified in court. It was a fairy tale, you know? Things started progressively getting worse, and before you know it, I couldn't do anything right. I was being punished for not doing things correctly, and I was being forced to participate in things I didn't want to participate in, nor that I would have ever participated in if I really had the choice. Most of those times, he participated himself. He's not a very nice guy. Kayleene met David through Joe. The two would meet up with him in Hibbing over drugs. That would be the first of a total of 3 times she said she would meet David. In all those meetings, the focus was drugs, acquiring them, dealing them, using them. The next 2 times she saw David was at Joe's place. We know that he was beaten to a pulp and murdered in the 3rd and final meeting. So what happened at the second one? Here's where things get a bit, what's the word I'm looking for in a drug story? Cloudy. It is important to note that Kay has lied about her involvement, which she admitted on the stand as part of a plea deal. She told a grand jury, like she told investigators in her first interview, that Joe did all the violence to David, which we've established as a lie. To be sure, her fingerprints and DNA were lifted from the handle of the machete. Joe's was not. Joe's defense team argued that it was Kayleene, not Joe, who took the machete to the car, showing what she intended to happen. When more forensic results started surfacing, she, in subsequent interviews, began inserting parts of her role in the attack, still maintaining that she was under the command of Joe. In one interview, she said she was just telling investigators what Joe told her to say. As for why she stayed with Joe despite these issues, she attributed that to Stockholm Syndrome. "You don't understand the kind of monster he is," she told Joe's defense lawyer. "What he did to me when he threatened my loved ones, you don't understand. You will never, ever understand the kind of monster he is. Remember, you don't say no to Joe." Kayleene attributed to the drugs the gaps in her memory when it came to answering investigator questions. In the week leading up to the murder, she said she was using a lot more dope. "When you use that much, you are constantly chasing that high," she testified in court. "You do things you don't normally do to accomplish that. It's when you come down from the high, those times you're not thinking clearly. There are times it makes me delusional. It's a surreal experience," she said. She vacillated between emotions almost violently on the stand, extremely upset in some moments, sometimes asking if she can just go, and then extremely combative with Joe's defense team. Joe's defense team mocked her outbursts in court, calling it an Oscar-worthy performance. From an objective reading of the transcript, she appeared patronizing, explaining to lawyers that the phrase is actually "the slowest thing in the world is a tweaker on a mission," not "the slowest thing in the world is tweaking on a mission." And when accused of selecting certain memories to recall, she explained, "There is no select memory. When a person remembers something, it is because there is significant value to it in one shape or form or another. And that is one of those things that makes you not remember because that is a significant value that makes you want to forget. What I am saying is that at the time, I was not in the right state of mind to even be questioned. I was in a state of shock," she said. Kayleene hadn't been living with Joe at the time of her second meeting with David, according to Kayleene's version on the stand. At some point during that meet, according to her story, Joe ordered her to give David oral sex and to let him do whatever he wanted to her. "He told me I better participate or I know what's going to happen. I interpreted that as he was going to hurt me. I was going to get punished. His word for it was conditioned. So I participated. I felt low, dirty, inhuman, like a tool, like a piece of property. I blamed both of them, Joe for making me do it, and David for doing it," she said in court. She also claimed that Joe had left the two alone to go somewhere during that second rendezvous, and that David had raped her and left before Joe got back. That's the version, it appeared, she told Joe right before David came over on the morning of June 21, 2016.
Joe went to the store real quick to go get some pop, and he went me and then took off.
You left
Before Joe got back.
Okay. There's different definitions of rape.
Penetration.
Okay. Did you tell Joe right when he got back?
No.
Was this ever reported to law enforcement, to the Grand Rapids Police?
No, nor will I ever report anything like that to police.
Okay.
It's the last time that I told.
And this happened, you're saying, how many months ago?
I don't know, like 1 or 2.
Kayleene claims she didn't immediately approach Joe about it because she feared he'd beat her up if he didn't believe her. It was only brought up on June 21, the night of mayhem, because Kayleene questioned why Joe wanted David over. She claimed that when Joe asked her why she didn't want him over, she finally came forward with the allegation. Joe was seething about it, she said. When David called out her name while being stabbed, she said, "After what happened, he said my name. I didn't want him to say my name. I did not want to hear his voice saying my name. Not my name after that." So she joined in to silence him. As the defense team put it, the woman who cut off the head of David Haiman also cut a deal with the government. She pled guilty to second-degree intentional homicide. In exchange for 30 years in prison, with the possibility that she could get out in her early 40s on good behavior, she agreed to testify against Joe, who was facing charges of first-degree premeditated murder. At issue then was, who was the head of the snake? Joe's team argued that there's no evidence of a baseball bat being used at all. The medical examiner couldn't say how the skull fracture occurred. Could have been a kick, could have been a rock, they said. It was Kayleene, they argued, who did this. She exited the car and started violently stabbing David when he popped the hood, they said. She lost control. She probably kicked him in the head while he was incapacitated, or when his head was lopped off, they argued. As for the claim Joe stabbed David's decapitated head and picked it up like a head on a stake, they said there's no evidence of that from the medical examiner. So if you think of Kayleene as the center of the hub, and all of these people on the outside of this wheel on the spoke, this thing is just spinning out of control. There's no controlling it, and you can't control it, the defense team said in its concluding statement. This was not premeditation. If you were going to premeditate something, you wouldn't go to a party and make stupid statements. You wouldn't leave a trail of evidence all over the county. You wouldn't go to Loretta Cloud's residence with the person that you were going to kill visible to everybody. The whole world knows. You wouldn't go to Jody Dewey's house with your victim and smoke meth with them in front of someone who can tell law enforcement everything that's going on. What this really was meth-fueled, angry, rageful, brutal killing done by Kayleene, the defense continued. That's what that is. It's all Kayleene, and then she got her plea. And what she said, I was outside the car, I went back in after he said it, reached into my purse, grabbed the knife and stabbed him because he said my name. After what happened, he said my name. I didn't want him to say my name. I didn't want to hear his voice saying my name. Not my name after that. She conned the people around her. She conned the police. She conned the prosecution. Don't let her con you, the defense said, directing its attention to the jury. The jury disagreed, siding with the state's argument that this was a Bonnie and Clyde affair. Both had an equal share in the violence. Kayleene whispered in Joe's ear. Joe got physical with David. They both beat him in the bedroom, and they both murdered him with premeditation. As for why none of the others did anything, the state argued simply. Nobody tells Joe no. Joe Thoresen was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree premeditated murder, liability for crimes of another, first-degree murder while kidnapping, and first-degree murder while committing kidnapping, liability for crimes of another. He was sentenced to life without parole. I am a good person, Joe said during his sentencing hearing. I've done nothing but help people my whole life, and this woman has really got you all. I'm sorry about what happened to David. He was my very good friend, and I really wish, and I really hope, that this case will help other people in the future with investigation techniques, and I just hope this helps people in the future. I really have nothing else to say besides thank you all for a job well done. I don't know, I'm sorry that she got over on all of you guys. Because of her, I've lost my life as well, so thank you. The judge had these parting words for Joe. Mr. Thoresen, I think you need to think about what the jury has found here, and I really don't know what to say to you. This is unfortunate for you, it's unfortunate for everyone involved, and particularly the poor man who died.
And my girl, dude, she flipped the fuck out.
I can imagine.
So everything's all mixed up in her head, too. Fucking,
just blaming everything on you, huh?
Being a big fucking mess.
Joe made several calls from the jail in July 2016 to his family and friends after his arrest. The significance of those calls was that his story changed fluidly between them, from not remembering anything, to blaming others, to saying it was an accident, to accepting that he had messed up.
It's my bad. I'm the one that fucked up.
Normally, the sentencing hearing is a place for the family of the victim to give statements testifying to the devastation that a lost loved one has had on them, as well as to shed some light on that life lost. In this case, no victim impact statements were entered for David, so a closer examination into his life and how he fell with the wrong crowd cannot be gleaned. But if his Facebook account is anything to go by, he was indeed loved. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me narrate this story. which is based on the primary sources. Special mention to the local reporters, the public records departments, the courts, and other assistance provided by the agencies involved to make this documentary happen. I hope you're all well, you're doing acts of charity, and don't do drugs.